Native son and former Pittsford Mayor Robert Corby discusses proposed code changes in both Pittsford and Fairport and the potentially negative effects those changes could have, including forever altering the fundamental character of residential neighborhoods, streetscape, and historic architecture of these Victorian-era Erie Canal Villages. Join us for today's guest, Robert Corby. Hey, Bob, how are you?
I'm great.
Welcome to the show, the big show.
Thank you.
Why don't we start, I guess, first of all, we're going to talk today about a lot of issues common to the two communities, all communities really, in upstate New York and across the country, and relative to new initiatives around code revisions and things that can impact the quality of life, et cetera, in those communities. Hot topic in Fairport right now. Obviously, you got concerns in Pittsford as well. You are a former mayor of Pittsford. You are a native of Pittsford. Your family's one of the more entrenched families. Been around since when?
1787.
1787. So a little bit.
Little time.
You got a little investment in the community there. Yeah. So let's back up a bit though, and Bob Corby. Who are you, and why should we care?
Well, in my professional life, most of my career was spent in historic architecture and preservation planning. And that's my expertise. Designed a few buildings in the village, including the Pittsford Flour Mill renovation, the renovation of First Presbyterian Church, Towpath Pike, and, of course, Pittsford Farms Dairy.
Right, the ever-popular Pittsford Farms Dairy. And that's family, right?
That's our family's business, yep. It
right.
was started in 1814 as a stagecoach business, went out of my dad's family, and then my mother's family, my great-grandfather, acquired it, and it's been in the family since then.
Wow. All right. Yeah, so you also spent a stint as mayor of Pittsford.
28 years, correct.
That's a bit.
That's a bit of time, right?
Yeah. So suffice to say, between your lineage and your service to the community, you know a little bit about Pittsford.
I think so.
Yeah.
I think so.
Good.
I'm also a history
Good thing,
buff.
because that's why I have you on the show.
I like history because I think it really does provide a context to make informed decisions about current policy issues.
Yeah. Okay, so for me, I spent almost 20 years in community development in Fairport. There's an initiative there now, today, currently underway for the past few years to modify the code in the community, which is of some concern. You know, exactly why are we doing this and what problem are we trying to solve? Pittsford and Fairport are both extremely popular destination communities relative to, a place to live, raise a family, enjoy a good walkable community lifestyle. So exactly what are we trying to change here and why is a big question. Also as a Canal Town boy myself, born in Lockport, raised in Gasport, high school, Middleport, college in Brockport, lived in Rochester for a number of years, raised my family in Brockport, was very involved in community activities, and I was chairman of the planning board in Brockport for 6 years. I was on it for like 16 years. So I'm very familiar with what happens, especially in the case of Brockport, when you see single-family housing become something other than what it was intended to be. In the case of Brockport, there were a couple of very industrious families who were buying up those houses, flipping them into student housing, and the subsequent degradation of those homes and the neighborhoods those homes were in was a continuing problem. When I moved there with my family just prior to my first child's birth in 1991, fall of 91, and I haven't got the exact number, but around mid-40s, 42, 45% of the housing stock had already been converted to student housing. I worked for 20 years, honestly, trying to stem that tide. It was very contentious at times. There was a lot of political overtones, obviously, in that people who wanted to defend others' rights to do that, and others who were like, no, you're infringing on my rights to have a normal residential lifestyle. And so that became kind of a political issue every 4 years. Also serving on the planning board, obviously gave me insight into who was doing what and how. And so by the time I left Brockport after raising my family there 20 years later, the the percentage of housing stock that was committed to student housing had risen to the low 60 percentage area. It's just not tenable. It's a transient population that is very rough on the structures, have no investment in the structures. The owners of the structures are just churning, as much rent as they can get out of each student they put into one of those houses, on a per semester basis. It's very lucrative, and I understand that from a capitalistic.
The villages are very special because they incorporate the whole host of urban uses in a very small, compact area, and they provide a center for social gathering and shopping and recreation for the surrounding towns. And I think, over the last 3 decades, there's been a renewed understanding of the value of them for the quality of life. And that's why real estate generally in functioning villages appreciates at a higher rate than the surrounding area. And that certainly is true in Pittsford. What you're talking about in Brockport is very similar to a challenge that Pittsford faced in the 1970s when the town was growing rapidly at that point, and there was a big push to increase commercial space in the village and expand the commercial district into the residential neighborhoods. That didn't happen because there was a grassroots effort, and since that time, there's been a grassroots effort in Pittsford to, with a sense of stewardship, to understand what are the assets that we have, our history, the canal, our open spaces, the farms, recreational areas. And that's really made the difference in putting Pittsford on a different route than so many other similar towns have been transformed by suburban development that sort of eliminated the walkability and the qualities that people really cherish in traditional downtown areas. Fortunately, both Fairport and Pittsford still have those qualities, which is why they're admired by other communities across the state today.
So specifically, right now there's a proposal in Pittsford that has raised some concern, and you are one of those people who's concerned about it.
Yeah, there's been a discussion about short-term rentals, Airbnbs, VRBOs, and I see it as very similar to what happened in the 70s. It's 5 years ago we didn't have any of these, and now we have 14 Airbnbs in the village. And this is a challenge that perhaps in some ways results from the success of the village transforming into a destination with all the development we've done on the canal along historic Shane Place. The problem with it is that the owners of short-term rentals, and one resident I spoke to yesterday after you and I spoke, Scott, looked at the ownership of, there's only one short-term rental in the village of the 14 that's owned by a village resident. All of the others are outside LLCs or people that don't live in the community. And the reason, as I said before, that Pittsford is still Pittsford is there's always been a critical mass of residents that live there that are affected immediately by changes in the community and are willing to come to meetings, to speak out and try to direct the community in the best way for the future. The other thing that makes Pittsford a great village is I live a block away from Main Street, and it's still a viable street with a mix of families, of people of different ages, incomes, whatever, and it's a wonderful historic street. And so unlike most towns have created a moat of parking or disinvestment that isolates the downtown business district from the residential areas. That hasn't happened in Pittsford. However, the village is small. It's the smallest village in Monroe County. On many streets, there's maybe 6, 7 houses. And if you start taking those houses away with a commercial use, with people don't live there, it's like dominoes. You're going to lose the support for doing right things. And, over the last few years, we've seen big party politics come back into Pittsford with candidates and elected officials that, despite saying one thing in the election, have clearly been represented by outside development interests and are working against what the village residents have told the village board they want for the future.
Okay. So this particular proposal would create a specific code to regulate?
There's a draft code that was discussed at a meeting a week ago, and it would limit the areas where short-term rentals are allowed. It would allow them in some commercial areas and maybe one or two of the residential areas, but not much of the village it wouldn't allow. And the reason for that, and there's a number of good reasons why short-term rentals aren't really appropriate. Many of our neighborhoods have very small lots with small homes,
right,
and with very limited parking. Some neighborhoods, on-street parking is required for the residents, but there isn't overflow parking. And often in short-term rentals, you'll have 4 or 5 cars that, when a house is rented, that need to be put somewhere. The other thing, the other issue here is impervious surface capacity in these areas. Our storm sewer system is almost 100 years old, and in many areas at capacity, we don't have the ability to pave over more areas because we simply can't handle the water. And I think the other thing is that home values have increased in Pittsford, and affordability is an issue. We're fortunate right now, 27% of the residential units in the village are rental. And there's a range of apartments from studios, 1-bedrooms, to 3-bedroom apartments. There's also a range of houses. Most houses are fairly modest in size. 1,700, 1,800 square feet is pretty typical. There's a lot of houses that are only 1,200, 1,400 square feet. But the thing is, short-term rentals take houses off the market, and so there's fewer houses available for families. And I think, having grown up in the village myself, I think one of the greatest values of the village is that it gives kids a place where they can actually leave their house safely, go to the library, go to the recreation center, play ball, play tennis on the tennis courts at the high school. And, if we lose our neighborhoods to, commercial uses like short-term rentals, it won't be a functioning village again. And it may look nice. It may continue to look nice. Most of the short-term rentals are fortunately well-maintained, but it won't have the sense of community that really is what so many people love in Pittsford. One of the traditions we've had over the last almost 10 years now is in the summer we have these things called village lawn parties that every week on Wednesday, someone around the village hosts a party. They provide a table, and then everybody brings drinks and food and so forth. And it's just a gathering of, anywhere from 50 to 70 people that hang out, between 6 o'clock and 8 o'clock on the front porch or in the lawn or somewhere around the village. And it's just a way for neighbors to get to know each other. And, I live in a 1840 house on an old street, and I walk my dog every day around the block, and I know almost everybody on the block. You can't say that in most neighborhoods in suburbia, and it's something that it's hard to put a dollar value on it, but I think changing the uses that are allowed in our neighborhoods would be a serious mistake. We'd lose something that we have today.
Yeah, like you, I live a block from Main Street in the village of Fairport, and there is a massive parking lot between me and Main Street,
right,
out my back door.
Yep.
But conversely, the public market's literally my backyard every Saturday morning.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
And what's evolved over the past couple of years in my current residence is that friends, neighbors, family will stop over Saturday morning, have a cup of coffee, hang out, shoot the bull, and then we'll go walk the market.
Nice.
And it's just become a lovely, like your lawn parties, it's become this really nice, casual. Some people will just show up. Others will say, call.
A lot of people from Pittsford actually go to Fairport for the farmers market.
It's a great farmers market.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, what I wonder though about the code specifically that they're trying to introduce is it trying to regulate or promote? Or in regulating, does it have the consequence of promoting the expansion of this type of thing? I
think it's trying to limit and regulate. I think, there was a public hearing held last week, and I think the residents who spoke very specifically with a lot of nuance and understanding of the issue. And the issue is nobody's against, per se, a short-term rental. There's not an anti-short-term rental movement. I think what I heard repeatedly is that people like the sense of community. They like family-oriented neighborhoods where they know their neighborhoods. There are many communities where the short-term rentals have changed the character of the community. And, I pick on Niagara-on-the-Lake because it's an example of a very historic village that has kind of sold its soul to tourism. And so if you live there and you want to go to the library, you have to drive 3 miles out of town. That's not what we want to become in Pittsford. We've done 2 award-winning comprehensive plans, and consistently the residents said, yes, we love the fact that we're a destination. We love the fact that people love to come here, and we have vibrant businesses on the canal and throughout the village. But we also want to make sure this remains a village center that serves our needs, and it's a place that we can live, and maybe our children and grandchildren can live here also.
Okay, so what I'm hearing is that this would add a measure of control to the expansion of this type of activity.
Correct.
Which is good.
It would limit.
Desirable.
The board they haven't, I think, decided on exactly what the limits will be, but the general idea is that there will be a limited number of permits issued for this to ensure, again, because the village is small, that we're not dominated in one area by short-term rentals.
Yeah, and, it's kind of writ small, the same thing that happened in Brockport with the transient population of student housing, magnified by the fact that most students, it's their first time away from home. They're spreading their wings. They're engaging in activities that they couldn't get away with at home, a lot of them.
Right.
And so you have behaviors that are just, not conducive to a more family-oriented community lifestyle.
When I was first elected mayor, we had about a dozen problem houses in Pittsford where there were drugs or crime or just they had become, we were close to 2 colleges. We had a couple college houses that were nuisances in the neighborhood. And through code enforcement, we sort of drove those problems away. The other thing that was done based on resident feedback is you can't split. We have 27% rentals, as I said before. You can no longer take in any neighborhood a single-family home and split it up into apartments or change it. And this was done because, again, the issue I mentioned previously, in most neighborhoods, we don't have a place to put the cars. If you split a house into 3 apartments, there's no place for those cars to park. And as much as we aspire to be walkable, and, the reality is in 2024, every tenant in every apartment almost that we have, except maybe a few elderly people, has a car or multiple cars. And so you have to deal with that reality.
Right. So, again, transient populations, even in the situation that's presented itself here in Pittsford, just don't have the same investment. They don't have the same connection.
Another thing that, one of the talking points for the proponents of short-term rentals is, these people spend money at our businesses, and, residents don't really support village businesses. Well, that's not true. Being deeply involved in my family's business at Pittsford Farms Dairy, I see every single one of my neighbors in that store, often more than once a week. The other thing that people don't think about is a single-family house is generally occupied 95% of the time, except maybe when the family goes on vacation or goes away. A short-term rental, some of them are occupied 50%, 20% of the time. They're much of the time they're actually vacant. And so there's nobody there to support village businesses. The other thing, in talking to other mayors and other communities, is that people go to short-term rentals because they often like to cook. So they don't want to go out to restaurants because they're going to cook. That's why they didn't go to a hotel.
Right.
And so, I think you've got to look at the whole picture and not just, talking points from people that support the business model of a short-term rental.
That's the Pittsford situation. In Fairport, currently, there's a proposal for adjusting the zoning there using a character-based code, which is an interesting characterization. You've reviewed, obviously, and with your expertise, which is why you're here today, you've reviewed that the code itself has not yet been written. they've launched into a really thorough PR campaign, basically, preparing the public for the fact that we're going to make these changes. And I'm a little bit pessimistic as to how much of the feedback they're getting from the community they're actually going to pay attention to and utilize.
I have a question for
Yeah.
you, Scott. Has the community been asking for code changes? Have residents complained that there's conflicts with uses, or what's driving this?
Yeah, not that I am aware of. I think this is from the government outward, not from the citizens into the government.
So it's top down, not grassroots.
Yes, thank you. That's a better way of characterizing it. No, I don't think so. And just by way of background, again, I was the director of the Fairport Parenting Partnership for a Better Community, which was founded in 2000. I arrived there to become the director in 2005 and stayed until 22. In that period of time, there were comprehensive plan updates, a couple of them, I think, et cetera, et cetera. The latest one called for a code revision. Okay, that's fine. That was around 2020, and this process was put into motion, somewhat delayed, of course, because of COVID, like so much was. And now the initiative really began to pick up steam here this year with a series of meetings that were established by and public forums and input sessions and so on and so forth, a number of locations in the village. And a lot of people attended. There's genuine interest in this and not a small amount of concern as to what the intent is, especially when we talk about things like accessory dwelling units that could be, if you have a big enough backyard, you could put down one of these, tiny houses, and thus, create a new residential opportunity. But what of the infrastructure issues, the parking, as you've mentioned with Pittsford, or the aging
storm sewer and drainage.
Right.
And that's especially true now because we are seeing larger stormwater events. Larger storms are coming through. And so we're having flooding in areas that we never had flooding before.
Right. And so there's genuine concerns around all of that. And you've taken some time to review the documents that have been put out by the Village of Fairport.
Yep.
Up to date. Apparently, according to their schedule, we should, in early 25, see their first draft proposal for the code and subsequently have opportunity. But from what I recall of the timeline on that, here it is, hope you like it, and we're going to vote on it by, I think, first quarter of the year. So at this point, they feel like they've done their due diligence on taking input. Whether they've listened to any of it or not is the question. We'll find out when we see the code.
And there are some parallels between the comprehensive plan that we did in Pittsford back in 2019 and what Fairport is doing right now. And we had a consultant that sounds, in reading this document, it sounds very similar to what the consultant was telling the Comprehensive Plan Committee. And they were advocating for these solutions that they had used in urban settings that really don't apply to a village. And, the difference is in many of the concepts, like multi-use, the importance of urban arterial streets being, multi-use corridors that it can accommodate residential on the upper floors and a mixture of uses, any use on the main floor that engages the street. That is an urban strategy that works in areas where real estate is limited and real estate values are very high, and hopefully it's walkable, where parking may not be available, where you have to cram a lot of stuff into a small area. Villages are a different animal because they have a hierarchical physical structure that is part of the reason why it works, with density concentrated in the center, cascading downward to less dense on the edges and more residential uses, maybe some open space, institutional areas with large campuses and so forth. So there's a pattern that is historic and gives character to communities, and it's what makes them function well.
Right. So in the case of Fairport, you have the commercial, traditionally the commercial area along Main Street, both sides of the canal, but the heavier density until urban renewal was on the south side. it's very interesting also sociologically how that worked. The north end of town was the labor class, right? Small houses,
Yep.
tightly put together, small lots. It was also tended to be whatever the latest wave of immigrant minorities were.
Sure.
Initially, it was the Irish, then it was the Italians. And to this day, there's a very strong relationship between the Italian-American community in Fairport and the North End. Right? Northside Johnny, a very popular rock band for the past 40 years. A lot of those guys were of that area and of that neighborhood. The north side or the south side of the canal was the commercial blocks. It was all the Catholic Church was also on the north side, always.
Right.
The Protestants were on the south side, so were the commercial blocks. So were the captains of industry who ran the factories on the north side. It's like that. The canal was a moat almost between these two faiths and cultures. Was it that way in Pittsford as well?
On a smaller scale, Pittsford had a neighborhood called Little Dublin, which was Irish. And there was also an area on the north end around the pickle factory that was where the Italians were concentrated. And that's not the way it is today, and those neighborhoods are very desirable. But my grandmother, Corby, who was a WASP, told the story that her mother would not allow her to play with people on the other side of South Street because they were Catholic and Irish. So definitely, and the other side of my family is Catholic, so I can say that.
Yeah, and you hear that from old timers in Fairport. Very distinct lines were drawn.
Right.
So over time, however, that's the great melting pot, which is, of course, not something we talk about these days, I guess, but it's leveled the playing field, and the value of properties across the board in Fairport has risen to all-time highs.
Because it's a nice village, right?
What happens when this code comes in potentially? What are the impacts on existing home values for single-family homes? Because some of this reads like it could end up creating mixed housing in single-family residential neighborhoods where the homes are really. Obviously, there's serious investments being made in those homes and their purchase and upkeep.
Well, one of the things in looking through the information on what's being proposed that I didn't see was a detailed inventory with data on what is the current mix of uses and what are the market shortcomings of that mix of uses. I haven't heard any discussion on, because Fairport, even compared to us, has a very diverse housing stock from, $1 million houses and on huge lots to multifamily and fairly high density condos. I mean, you have the gamut today. So why is the, from what this is, the documents I've seen, they're trying to expand one part of that housing, but I don't hear any discussion about the needs or market needs for the rest of the segments that exist today. And it seems like they're going, the goal is rather abstract because I don't hear them saying, well, we want, 28%, low-income housing or any other goal. It just seems like they're applying as a Band-Aid something that's been used in urban areas to solve a different set of problems and then trying to apply that to Fairport. It doesn't seem to make sense to me.
Yeah, it doesn't really fit readily. So without some type of baseline research, this inventory, you want to describe that a little bit? When we did our comprehensive plan, we did an in-depth look at everything from the available parking to support our businesses. We looked at the mix of residential. How many apartments do we have? What size were those apartments? How many single-family homes do we have? How much potential is there for additional development? Where could we yield more density without affecting the historic core of the village, which is on the National Register of Historic Places? And so, the bulk of the comprehensive plans time was spent doing research, understanding what
what are our existing conditions, and then what do we like and what do we want to keep that we value as assets, and what does the community want to change? But it wasn't driven by what the consultant wants to do. It was driven by, we did an in-depth survey. We mailed a survey to every resident, every adult resident in the village, and according to the company that prepared the survey, the feedback that we got was extraordinarily high, and that's what drove the conclusions that were in our comprehensive plan. So it really was grassroots driven, and that's what comprehensive plans are supposed to do.
So identifying what you have, any problems inherent in that, and then formulating a solution. Correct. So,
and then vetting those solutions with our residents to make sure that everybody was comfortable with that. And when they weren't, we came up with compromises that tried to, as best we could, balance competing interests in the few cases where those things happened.
Yeah. So what problem are we solving with the character-based code proposal in Fairport?
Well, that's what I wonder, because everyone I know of loves Fairport. It's got an incredible entertainment retail as a destination. I mean, it's where people, if you want a variety of food choices or a place to hang out with friends, Fairport has many, many options. It's got the canal, which is beautiful, and it's got wonderful neighborhoods and a great park system, even in the village. So it has, if you're a family or a retired person or even a millennial, it's the type of community that it offers something, the different types of housing and different types of lifestyles. So I don't, personally, from the outside looking in, I don't see the problem. But, you live there, maybe you...
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, I've owned a home in the village. I've owned a home in the township. I currently live in the village again. And what I've seen in my time here since 2005 is, general improvement in the housing stock and upgrading of that. But also always, like I owned a home on Roselawn in the village. Very much a mixed situation between single-family occupied homes and multiple unit rental homes that have been converted for the purpose. It's a great mix. It works. It's fine. I don't see the problem. I haven't experienced the problem myself.
Well, I can talk from experience a little bit because, of 20 of the 28 years I served as mayor, I also served as a member of the executive board of the New York Conference of Mayors, the organization that represents the 534 cities and villages in the state. And in talking to the other mayors in Monroe County and the mayors that I met through that organization, almost everybody in that group, almost every municipality, city or village, regretted the fact that they had lost the core of their single-family homes. Because once they're cut up, once they're made multifamily, it's very expensive and usually not worth the investment to turn them back into single-family homes. There's very few real estate situations where the economics work. So, I think in some ways the issues that we're looking at today, short-term rentals or, a solely form-based code ignoring uses, we should look to the past. Because, if I look at Pittsford, that didn't do urban renewal, didn't allow commercial expansion, and we still have a village today. If we look at Fairport, that did do urban renewal, and I saw a great presentation by the Fairport historian, I think it was maybe a couple months ago.
Yeah, Bill Poirier.
Yeah, he gave a great presentation on that.
I've seen that one too.
And I think we probably would not do that today because Fairport lost some of the cohesive activity on Main Street. And although it's certainly one of the better examples of urban renewal, you can't replicate the history and the engaging building quality that Fairport once had.
Yeah, in my time there learning about it, the approach as it happened architecturally, it doesn't fit the era of the canal towns.
Right.
Architecturally, what happened with Fairport Landing and Packett's Landing it's more suitable for New England or Cape Cod.
Well, and the other problem with it, to be honest with you, is functionally. If you look at a traditional Main Street, the storefronts are transparent and they engage the activity with the street with what's inside the store. If you look at, the landings in Fairport, there's this split level, which is weird. So when you're on the sidewalk on the street, you don't have direct access into the storefronts. And that's why renting those spaces, I think, has been difficult. And,
Yes.
It's because they fundamentally, and here's the point of what I was saying anyway. The reason that was a flawed initiative is because they moved forward with a concept that was a fad. Planners go through fads. There's been a lot of terrible fads over the years.
Right.
And nobody studied what were the unanticipated consequences of that action. And I think the same thing is true today with short-term rentals. All around the world, places like Venice and Barcelona, even Las Vegas, are regulating them because they're concerned about that they will no longer be places where people actually live. This is true in communities like Skaneateles and Rhinebeck, Cold Spring, communities around Saratoga Springs, Ballston Spa. Historic communities in New York State that have become destinations are also trying to get the right balance here. So I think the overall lesson in both topics that we're discussing today is that you cannot rush into these without looking all aspects of what is the problem, define the problem you're trying to solve. And before you agree on a solution, make sure that number one, it's one that residents support, and number two, make sure you understand the unanticipated consequences of that action. Because many of these things, the problem with planning is if you make a bad decision, it's usually not reversible, and you have to live with it for a long, long time.
Right. Another active example in Fairport we touched on yesterday when we were having coffee is the American Can Factory, right? Here we are in post-industrial America, and what do you do with these massive facilities? And for years, the Village IDA, which is another great advantage Fairport has, there's a unique convergence of assets in Fairport. You have an IDA URA, which also formed an LDC a few years back. You have a really well-moneyed Merchants Association that puts a lot back into the community, and they're well-moneyed because of almost 50 years now of Canal Days festivals, which generates a lot of income that they then in turn roll back into supporting businesses, supporting community efforts. For decades they've bought the flower baskets on Main Street and all the holiday decorations that go up in the village, yada yada. So you have those two entities. Then you have the partnership, the Fairport Parenting Partnership for a Better Community, which is a joint partnership between the merchants, the town of Parenton. Currently the village was one of the founding partners. So was the IDA. They both pulled out. And so, it's not as uniform a support as it once had. It's no less important an organization for that. And I think some of the negative consequences you see around community development without the involvement of the partnership is in the public realm, where the village, since no longer availing themselves of the expertise of the design committee of the partnership, and I'm going to take a minute to explain that. The design committee of the partnership is populated with people such as yourselves, architects, engineers, urban planners, landscape architects, designers, professional designers, who give of their time and talent to provide guidance, expertise, and even plans to improve the public realm in the community. And since 2000, the partnership was involved in that. And about 4 years ago, the village, 3 years ago, the village pulled out completely, no funding support, stopped availing themselves of those things. And in the 3 or 4 years, 5 years now, I think, since then, you're seeing things such what I view as like post-industrial steampunk kind of executions of like the village signage, Corten steel boxes with plastic fronts that are, interior lit with the village logo. There's
one striking one right on Main Street on the village landing. And when they put it up, I thought, oh my God.
Right in front of Village Hall? Is that
right across from Village Hall.
What is that?
It looks like something you'd expect to see on Ridge Road in Greece. But it's hard to see. It's hard to read the lettering of the sign, and it really detracts from the ambience. It's LED. It's a very cool LED backlit sign, completely inappropriate. And I would also say, in Pittsford, we also have there's political challenges as well.
Right.
The village has had a local preservation law since 1971, which is largely the reason historically so much of its architecture is still intact today. Over the last few years, we've seen political candidates financed by outside development interest running for office and then doing things different from what they said they would do when they got in office. But one of the effects of that is the attempt to remove experience and knowledgeable people from the planning, ZBA, and Historic Preservation Board and replace them with political appointees that can be manipulated. And that's, it's a violation of the premise of New York State village law, and it also erodes the professionalism and effectiveness of the boards. And so, local politics is often ignored today because we no longer have a local media that covers these issues. But it's even more important that citizens remain engaged, because when you think about it, local government is probably the level of government that affects you the most.
Yeah, I completely agree on that point. And honestly, one of the reasons we're doing this podcast is to provide some channel or avenue for discourse on issues of public importance, right? I mean, otherwise, this stuff just happens. And so, Lift Bridge Lane West in the village, where they put up the arch using some leftover parts of the refurbished lift bridge. And then again, more Corten seal, more big glary, interior lit boxes, which I believe, if they aren't still, they were against village code. You can't do that as a commercial business, but the village is running around doing it.
Well, we had a project that our mayor was trying to reshape the historic Shane Place waterfront and basically wipe out all of the improvements that were done over the last 30 years and replace them with a cantilevered diversity garden with a very contemporary design that really was incompatible with the historic context. And the village had gotten a grant for the project, but it was kiboshed by the State Historic Preservation Office because nobody in the current leadership of the village did the research to understand that if you use state money, it has to be reviewed by SHPO to ensure that it's appropriate and complies with the Secretary of the Interior standards for rehabilitation. So, all that effort and money that was spent getting that grant went down the drain because there was no communication, no input from anybody else. Historically in the past, we would have sought input from our preservation board. But, again, the problem with politics and egos is some people want power and control, and then the system breaks down.
Right. And it becomes more about, unfortunately, people who are not necessarily qualified are making aesthetic decisions.
Correct. That
negatively impact, whether it's the urban renewal in the 70s that got us the 2 landing projects. The flip side of that, by the way, I just want to point out, as someone who marketed Fairport as a destination, and we should get into destinations a little bit and consequences of that. It embraced the water, whereas most canal towns, the back of the commercial blocks faced the water, and nobody wanted to be around the water. It's don't go down, don't let the kids play down there. Just don't be there. Fairport embraced it. And so when somebody comes in on the canal, it's a very welcoming place, much as now Shane Place is. It's a very different thing. But consequently, that architecture, that embracing of the waterfront has made Fairport fairly unique among canal towns in terms of the experience of the traveler on the canal, the boater, the recreational boater, and it has worked from a marketing standpoint because of that. It's a very unique destination. Plus the dining options, plus the entertainment options. Some people who are very involved in all that have started referred to Fairport as Nashport. It's like a Nashville kind of scene.
Yeah.
Any given night, you can find probably a half dozen places where you can go hear live music, which is really wonderful. And then also, again, a partnership project during my tenure was designing and constructing the train viewing platform there to take advantage of the fact that we have 50 trains a day rolling through town because of the unique convergence of rail lines in Fairport, only there. And consequently, people from all over the country and the world come to watch trains in Fairport. Not something I want to spend my time doing, but we recognize it as a viable 365 days of the year destination marketing opportunity. And it has absolutely paid dividends. So with that, though, back to some of the issues around residential life, you get parking issues, right? The reconstruction of the cannery or repurposing the cannery into an entertainment dining destination has been extremely successful to the point where the level of occupancy in that, and we talked about this a little bit yesterday. I understand the level. Again, I don't have the specific numbers, and if someone from the village wants to reach out to me and correct this, we'll correct it. But basically, there's somewhere in the neighborhood of 400 or so parking spots in the parking lot in the cannery, based on the occupancy of all the various businesses there. There should be somewhere in the neighborhood of 1,500, 3 times, essentially, what is available there. And this has been part of a policy, I think, in their eagerness, and I understand that. As a planning board person, why once you give someone a waiver on parking requirements, you can't turn around and deny the next people down the line.
Right.
You've got to roll with that policy. And so consequently, we have this situation. Now, I noted, I watched a meeting online from the village the other day, and the gentleman who's purchased the First Baptist Church wants to turn it into a performing arts venue for a theater production company for youth. Great idea, perfect use for the venue. The partnership had that building under control for a year and a half. We couldn't move the ball forward for a bunch of environmental reasons, but I noted that the planning board was really holding this guy's feet to the fire about parking. And not only about parking, which there's tons of it within 300-400 feet of the building, but about pedestrian safety when approaching, going into, about dropping the kids off for classes and whatnot. And I thought to myself, that's an extraordinary level of demand for this person to say, what are you doing about safety in the public realm when people are crossing the street? Well, now I defer to your knowledge on this. It seems to me a valid consideration, but not a burden that should be borne by the developer necessarily.
No, I would agree with you, Scott. I mean, in concert with our comprehensive plan, we've also done a great deal of work on walkability and traffic calming, and taking some streets that were 4 lanes and bringing them back down to 2 to increase on-street parking. And the narrower the street, the slower the cars work. And unfortunately, the current mayor has rolled back some of these improvements out of, I guess, ignorance. But that clearly, this is where everybody is going, because it's been proven slower streets don't necessarily slow traffic, but they do make it safer for drivers and for pedestrians. And they create not only streets that are walkable, but streets that people want to walk on. And you've got to have a consistent, that's why, that you have to have, and you've always got to look at the big picture. Every project, every initiative should be put into context with the big picture of what are we doing here? Because, I think we can talk about, the 2 villages destinations. Both of us, in different ways, aspire to be destinations. Fairport is about 3 times the size of the village of Pittsford, more than 3 times the size, I think.
Yeah.
But we both have, a nice mix of amenities for visitors and for residents. And I think not forgetting, just like the short-term rental issue, you don't want to just go with one initiative blindly without considering the effects it has on everything else. So, for example, in Pittsford, yes, we spent over 9 projects to transform Shane Place and, create the promenade, the bandstands, the pavilions, the benches, the landscaping, et cetera, et cetera. We also did, on the other side of the village, rather than expand commercial development along our entire waterfront, we condensed it into one area, and on the other side of Main Street, where we had 35 acres of undeveloped land, that's been conserved as a nature park and a native tree arboretum. That was my last active mayor, and one of the things I'm most proud of, because we learned during COVID how important access to natural open space is for our mental and physical health. And I think there's been a renewed interest, not only because of climate change and all the environmental issues that we're facing today, but an understanding for families and for people of all ages, just getting out into nature is one of the best things we can do.
Oh my God. Yeah.
And so,
physical health, mental health.
When I was first elected mayor, that whole area was zoned for industrial development right on the canal. Now it's all been conserved, and we're in the process of removing invasive species. And my hope is over the next 25 years, incrementally each year a wave of new native trees, shrubs, and pollinator plants will eventually create a showcase of the native environment in upstate New York. And that's something, maybe visitors will go there, but that's something I can walk out of my door and in 10 minutes I can be surrounded by trees, barely hear traffic, and hear mainly birds and see deer, fox, turkey, whatever. It's a great amenity to have. And I think it underscores my belief that real communities that want to stay vibrant need to have balance the destination things with things that actually meet the needs of residents, and the whole, from the crib to being seniors, we should have things in the center of our communities that bring everybody in there. Things like libraries and parks and the public realm, as you spoke of.
Right, and these are things that both communities have. Thomas Creek wetlands in
exactly
Fairport,
another great example.
Yeah, just fantastic job by all the agencies involved in that.
Right. Well, we actually narrowed Shane Place down to 18 feet wide because it was a raceway previously, and had no
speed bumps too.
Had no
I
speed
enjoy
bumps,
those.
speed humps, and the whole idea in understanding is, yes, we have crosswalks and speed tables, but we know human behavior. People are just going to cross wherever they're going to cross.
Right.
And so rather than put them in danger, we wanted to throttle down the speed, understanding this is the type of street, and it's worked.
Right.
It's worked really well.
And there's an upcoming rehabilitation of the streetscape on Main Street in the Village of Fairport as well. There's going to be a reconstruction of the Thomas Creek Bridge on Main Street that was supposed to happen this year, I think, but it's been deferred, kicked down the line. I don't know when that's happening. So there's a lot going on in both communities. They're both incredibly desirable places to live and to visit. The cannery has become, I've heard more than once from the younger generations, the cannery is the new East End. The concern about that is, well, that's kind of an urbanization thing now too, right? We're becoming more urbanized by the virtue of the fact that these businesses are there and are so successful. And what does that do to the quality of life? And what do we do to anticipate the problems that can arise from that? There's a lot of questions, and not enough time to address them all here today.
Right.
But definitely something I, as a resident, someone who was involved for years in the development of the community and trying to get us to this point, along with many other people, look at it and go, oh, yay. Except if you live here, this becomes potentially somewhat problematic.
Well, I think, just to kind of summarize today, I think, on a positive note, Pittsford and Fairport pioneered exploiting the canal for recreational use.
Absolutely.
And we've been the leaders that now communities throughout the state, across the state on the canal, are following our lead. And so the problems that we have or we're facing now are really next level. They're, full parking.
True.
People complain about, it takes a little while to find a parking space sometimes in Pittsford, but most communities would love to have full parking, and we have it.
Yes.
And, decades ago, we made the decision, we're not going to clear out our neighborhoods to provide more parking for the businesses. So we'd rather, have both. And that's what we've done. So, I think both communities can pat themselves on the back.
Right.
But I think the lesson, of what's worked over the last 30 years is the best improvements have been done when things were carefully considered and slowly moved through, ensuring that the project, the work, or the initiative really represented what the residents want.
I agree, and it's multi-generational. I mean, you spanned a couple generations with your leadership there as mayor. I look back on in my time in Fairport, the leaders who were in place in the 70s when some of these decisions were made about urban renewal in Fairport were still in place when I arrived in 2005, many of them. And then there's, of course, intermediate generations who jumped in, including myself. And now, my son is 32 years old, living in the village, very involved with things. Stewardship is really important across generations. And you are given a gift by those who preceded you. And sometimes it's an imperfect gift, but it's yours to develop and care for and enhance and improve if possible. So I think, again, one of the goals of this podcast is to share information like this, encourage public discussion, encourage public participation, get people to get involved. You can make a difference. Your voice does matter. It should be heard. Don't settle. Don't settle for just being passive. Get out there and advance what you think is right.
I think that's a good point, because I know in our community, the most important initiatives, in the 1990s when there was a big housing boom in the town, there was a grassroots effort that I was a part of called the Greenbelt Association that worked with the town for the town to purchase the development rights on all of the remaining family farms in the town. And so now there's over 2,000 acres of that farmland that's protected in perpetuity. Some of it, 200 acres, is right inside the village. And very few communities have that. The developers opposed it, but that would not have happened if citizens hadn't come together, understood the problem, and worked diligently for several years to actually make that change happen. And now, 25 years later, we live in a better community because we have more open space, we have more recreational opportunities because of things that people did 30, 35 years ago.
Right. Well, this has been fun.
Thank you, Scott.
I'm glad you were able to join me. I'm glad you said yes.
I enjoyed the discussion.
Yeah, I mean, it goes back to during COVID, we did the Facebook Live thing together, and it was a good conversation then. And I had a feeling this one would, because of the live issues both communities are facing, I thought this would be a good session as well, and it was. So thanks for coming out.
You're very welcome.
Let's get together in a year and see where all this stands.
Let's do it.
All right, God willing.
All right, take care.
P-Town Profiles is what I call a hyper-local podcast that focuses on Rochester's east side towns and villages. We feature conversations with business and community leaders who help shape our local economy, our public places, our policy, our politics. Those who have, are, and want to make a difference discuss the ideas, issues, opportunities, and challenges facing Pittsford, Penfield, Perrington, and the villages of Fairport and Pittsford. Okay, and occasionally Victor, Webster, and Mendon too, as the need dictates. So we hope you like what you hear today, and if so, give us a like, subscribe, share with friends, and most importantly, get involved, take action. Don't be passive. It's your community. Take ownership. See you later.